Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Denzel Washington, one of Hollywood's most respected voices, sits across from Michael Strahan on Good Morning America and the topic turns to one of the most explosive questions of our time? Is today's news media too biased? At first, it seemed like another thoughtful morning interview. Denzel was there to promote his latest film, a story about integrity and truth. But when Strahan brought up the current state of journalism and whether the media can still be trusted, the tone shifted. Denzel didn't hold back. He said flatly, the problem isn't that the media is biased, it's that it's bought. The audience gasped. Strahan pushed back, defending journalists as the backbone of democracy. What followed was a tense, electrifying exchange that left the studio on edge. Denzel's voice carried the weight of frustration shared by millions, while Strahan stood his ground as the voice of mainstream credibility. Neither man backed down. By the time the segment wrapped, it wasn't about movies anymore. It was about truth, power, and who gets to define it in America today. The clash between calm conviction and polished defense would soon dominate social media feeds everywhere. This is Denzel Washington versus Michael Strahan, the debate that shook Good Morning America. The bright lights of Good Morning America bathed the set in that familiar golden glow. The air buzzed with energy as the live audience clapped, welcoming Denzel Washington to the stage. Michael Strahan, standing tall beside him, greeted him with a wide smile that didn't quite hide his curiosity. "Always an honor to have you here, man," Strahan said, offering a firm handshake. "You've got another powerful film coming out, The Line Between Truth and Power. That's a heavy title." Denzel smiled, relaxed but sharp. "It's a heavy time. People don't trust what they hear anymore, whether it's from politicians, social media, or the news." The audience hummed in quiet agreement. The segment was supposed to focus on the movie, but that last line hung in the air a second too long. Strahan picked up on it immediately. "That's interesting you say that," Strahan said, leaning forward slightly. "You think people have lost trust in the media? Or is it more about people only wanting to hear what fits their beliefs?" Denzel clasped his hands, the calm before the storm. "It's not that simple. The media used to ask tough questions. Now, too often, they're performing for clicks and sponsors. When truth gets filtered through profit, it's not truth anymore. It's marketing." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Strahan's smile stiffened just a touch. "That's a strong claim," he said. "But the journalists I know, good ones, risk their lives, work long hours, and care deeply about getting it right. Don't you think calling it marketing discredits a lot of honest people doing the work?" Denzel didn't blink. "Michael, I respect hard-working reporters, but I'm talking about the system that decides what stories get told and which ones disappear. That's not on the reporters. That's on the executives who run the networks." The crowd applauded. Strahan held his smile, but the tension was thick now. This wasn't the kind of feel-good segment Good Morning America was used to. "Well," Strahan chuckled to diffuse the moment, "you're sitting in one of those networks right now." The audience laughed lightly, but Denzel's expression didn't waver. "And that's exactly why I'm saying it here." A few people in the crowd gasped. One woman clapped alone, before others followed, unsure if it was safe to cheer. Strahan leaned back, nodding. "You've always been outspoken, Denzel, and that's one of the reasons people respect you. But some might say this kind of talk, criticizing the media, just gives more fuel to conspiracy theorists and people who don't believe in facts anymore." Denzel smiled, the kind that said he'd been waiting for that line. The truth doesn't need defending from people who abuse it. If facts are strong, they'll stand up to scrutiny. But if questioning the media is now considered dangerous, that's when we really have a problem. The audience erupted in applause this time. You could almost see the camera crew exchanging glances, unsure whether to zoom in on Denzel's face or Strahan's tight-lipped reaction. Strahan recovered quickly, his broadcaster instincts kicking in. "Look, we live in a complicated world. There's a lot of noise. Social media, misinformation, foreign interference. Newsrooms are trying to fight that every day. It's not about selling a story. It's about protecting the truth. Protecting whose truth? Denzel asked, his tone sharp but not raised. When two networks report the same event in two completely different ways, one of them's not protecting truth, they're protecting perspective. The media doesn't just tell us what happened, they tell us how to feel about it. And that's where it goes wrong. A few audience members nodded vigorously. One man even shouted, "He's right," before being hushed by producers off camera. Strahan inhaled, visibly choosing his next words carefully. So what's the solution then? No editorializing? No context? Just raw information? Maybe that's a start. Or maybe it's having journalists who aren't afraid to lose their jobs by speaking honestly, even when it's unpopular. For a moment, there was silence. Even the hum of the cameras seemed to quiet. Then Whoopi Goldberg, sitting at the guest panel for the morning, broke the tension with a grin. "Well, looks like breakfast got a little spicier today," she said, earning nervous laughter from the crowd. Strahan chuckled, but it didn't break the mood completely. "Hey, I'm all for spice," he said, gesturing to Denzel. "I just think sometimes the conversation about bias overlooks the fact that people doing this job care deeply about the truth. They're human. They make mistakes, sure, but they're not villains. I never said they were villains, but I do think too many people are told what to think instead of being taught how to think. That's the danger of bias. It's invisible when it's everywhere." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Strahan nodded slowly, his jaw tight but respectful. "Fair point," he said, then smiled for the camera. "We'll dig deeper into that when we come back after the break." As the lights dimmed for commercial, Denzel leaned slightly toward Strahan and said something off mic. Whatever it was, Strahan's eyebrows lifted, and he gave a small, uneasy laugh. Backstage crew members exchanged glances. They could tell the sparks weren't done flying. The cameras would come back on soon, but everyone in that studio knew the next segment wasn't going to be about a movie anymore. It was going to be about America's trust problem and whether truth still had a home on live TV.
The tension in the Good Morning America studio was impossible to ignore. What had started as a calm exchange between Denzel Washington and Michael Strahan had shifted into something far heavier, a philosophical showdown about truth, trust, and the state of journalism. Michael leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "Denzel, let's be honest," he began, tone polite but sharp. "You've said before that the media lies to the people, but isn't that painting with too broad a brush? You've got journalists out here risking their lives in war zones, reporting in hurricanes. Are they part of this lying machine too?" Denzel took a breath, his expression steady but his eyes glinting with something deeper. "Michael, I've never said all reporters are the problem," he replied slowly. "What I'm saying is, there's a difference between journalism and entertainment disguised as news. We used to report facts, now we report feelings. That's not information, that's manipulation." The audience murmured. The cameras cut between the two men, each framed in perfect contrast. Michael, polished and composed in his blue suit. Denzel, calm but intense, his voice carrying a quiet authority. Michael pressed on. "But that's evolution, isn't it? People want context now. They want human connection, emotion. You can't just read the evening news like a robot anymore." Denzel tilted his head. "Connection is fine, but when the emotion starts replacing the evidence, that's when truth gets lost. You can't build a nation on emotion, Michael. You build it on facts." Michael smiled tightly. "But who decides what's fact anymore? Every side's got their own version of the truth. Social media is part of the problem, sure, but so are people who dismiss all media as fake. That gives folks permission to ignore anything they don't like." Denzel's jaw tensed. "There's only one truth. You can twist it, repackage it, or drown it in spin, but it's still the same truth underneath. We've just stopped looking for it because outrage sells better." The crowd reacted with a low hum, half agreement, half challenge. Joy Behar, sitting in for the day, chimed in from the panel. "So what's the solution, Denzel? Should we all just stop watching the news?" Denzel turned to her. "No, Joy. We should question it. Ask who benefits from the story being told. Ask why that headline exists. The moment you stop questioning, you stop thinking, and that's when manipulation wins." Michael raised a brow.
That sounds a little conspiratorial, don't you think? Not everything is some hidden agenda. Denzel leaned in slightly. And yet, when was the last time a news story truly united people instead of dividing them? When was the last time we saw the media admit we got it wrong without a dozen excuses afterward? Michael exhaled. It's easy to criticize from the outside, Denzel, but try sitting in that anchor chair. The public wants speed. They want instant updates. The pressure to be first is enormous. Denzel's reply came quietly, but it cut through the room. Then maybe it's better to be right than first. The studio fell silent. Even the camera crew hesitated for a beat before the next shot. Michael finally said, "That's fair. But you've got to admit, you've benefited from the media too. Without it, people wouldn't know your movies, your interviews, your message." Denzel smiled faintly. "And that's exactly why I'm saying this. I know the power of the spotlight, Michael. It can reveal, or it can blind. The media holds that same power, and right now, too many are choosing to blind." The words hung heavy. Michael crossed his arms, weighing his next move. "You think it's that black and white?" Denzel shook his head. "No. I think it's about responsibility. If you have the mic, you have a duty. The truth shouldn't depend on what side you're on or who's paying for the commercial break." A ripple of applause broke out from the audience. Michael looked around, then back at Denzel, half smiling, half defensive. "You make it sound simple, but it's not, man. The world's messy." Denzel nodded. "The world's always been messy. But if we give up on finding truth just because it's hard, then we're not informing, we're entertaining. And entertainment doesn't save democracies." Michael leaned back, quiet for the first time. Joy gave a knowing look, her voice breaking the silence. "Well, that might be the most important thing said on morning television in a long time." The audience erupted in applause, but even through the clapping, you could sense the underlying friction still burning between them. Two men who both believed in honesty but saw the path to it through very different lenses. And though the commercial break loomed, neither of them looked ready to back down. The real debate, everyone sensed, was just beginning.
The applause faded, but the air still buzzed. You could feel it, the kind of energy that comes when polite debate turns into something personal. Michael Strahan shifted in his seat, resting his elbows on the table, his expression firm now. The easy morning show warmth was gone. "Denzel," he said slowly, "you talk about media responsibility, but what about the public's? People click what they want to hear. Outrage gets views because people choose outrage. Isn't that on all of us, not just journalists?" Denzel's eyes met his, calm but burning with conviction. "You're right, Michael. The audience plays a part, but leadership matters. If you're behind that desk, you set the tone. You can feed the flame, or you can cool it down." Michael leaned back, shaking his head. "That's idealistic. Newsrooms don't run on idealism. They run on ratings. You think producers are sitting there plotting to divide people? They're trying to survive in a system where people scroll past truth unless it screams." Denzel's jaw tightened. "And that's the tragedy right there. We've accepted that truth has to scream to be heard. Maybe the problem isn't the public, it's the system that's conditioned them." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Easy to say when you're not in it every day. You've got the luxury to criticize from the outside. You're not chasing breaking news, trying to keep people informed before misinformation floods the internet." Denzel nodded slowly. "You're right, I'm not. But I'm also not afraid to call it out when the system stops serving the people it claims to protect. You can't fight misinformation with half-truths. You fight it with integrity." That word, integrity, hit like a spark in dry grass. Michael's tone sharpened. "Are you implying journalists don't have integrity?" "I'm implying," Denzel said, leaning forward now, "that too many have traded it for access, for influence, for applause. It's not all of them, but it's enough to rot the foundation." The audience gasped. The tension was no longer subtle, it was electric. Joy Behar tried to ease the mood with a laugh. Okay, gentlemen, we're getting deep for morning TV." But neither man smiled. Michael's hands were clasped tight on the table. "You know, Denzel, sometimes I think people like you enjoy tearing down the media because it's convenient. You don't have to fix it. You just get to sound righteous about it." Denzel's voice dropped, lower now, deliberate. "I don't enjoy it. I mourn it. I grew up in a time when people trusted that what came out of that television was fact. Now they don't even know where to look for truth. That's not progress. That's decay." It was rare to see Denzel this raw, his controlled composure cracking just enough to show the fire underneath. The audience sat frozen, torn between awe and discomfort. Michael's voice softened. But what's the answer then? What do you want us to do? We can't undo the internet. We can't change human nature. Denzel paused, staring at him. You can start by telling the truth, even when it's unpopular. By not shaping every story around how it'll play online. By remembering that the microphone isn't a weapon, it's a responsibility. Those words hit hard. Michael looked down for a second, visibly thinking, but pride pushed him to respond. You make it sound like journalists are villains, but we're human, man. We're trying to navigate a world that's constantly changing. Denzel softened, but only slightly. Then tell the people you're learning too. They'll respect you more for it. We've got too many voices pretending to be certain about things nobody fully understands. For a brief moment, the set was silent. Both men sat there, two public figures from different worlds, colliding on live television over the soul of truth itself. Joy finally exhaled and looked at the camera. Well, she said, this conversation just got real. The audience laughed, breaking the tension for a second, but everyone knew the damage was done. The calm had shattered. Michael looked back at Denzel, his tone quieter now, but with a trace of wounded pride. You really think the media's beyond saving? Denzel shook his head. No, but I think it's losing its way. And unless people like you stand up and fight for it, Michael, we're going to wake up one day in a world where truth doesn't matter at all. A slow, uneasy applause started from the audience, hesitant but growing louder. Michael didn't clap. He just sat there, absorbing it all, realizing this wasn't just a segment. It was a mirror. And in that moment, everyone watching could feel it, the point where debate stopped being about politics or ratings and started being about something much deeper. What do we do when the truth itself is on life support? That question hung heavy, even as the show cut to commercial.
When the cameras returned from commercial, the air felt different. The smiles were tighter, the laughter forced. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the studio through the silence between words. Joy Behar tried to lighten the tension. Well, that was something, she said with a half smile. Welcome back to The View. We're talking about whether today's news media has gotten too biased, though judging by that last round, I think we already know how heated this can get. The audience chuckled nervously, but Denzel Washington wasn't smiling. He sat upright, calm but visibly weighed down by what he'd said. Across from him, Michael Strahan was still trying to steady himself, one hand tapping lightly against the mug on the table. "Michael," Joy said gently, "you look like you've got more to say." He took a breath. "Yeah, I do." He turned to Denzel, his voice lower now, but the frustration was still there. "You said earlier that integrity's been traded for access. That hit me, man. But let me tell you something. You don't work in this business day in, day out without trying to hold on to your integrity. Sometimes you fight tooth and nail to keep it." Denzel nodded but didn't interrupt. Michael continued, his tone picking up. "You think we don't care about the truth? You think people sit behind those desks scheming about what side to take? No. Most of us are just trying to report facts in a world where everyone demands a spin." Denzel's reply was quiet, but it carried across the room. "Then say no to the spin." Michael shook his head. "It's not that simple. You know what happens when you say no? They replace you with someone who'll say yes." That landed heavy. The room went still. Denzel leaned forward, his voice a mix of compassion and conviction. "Then what's the point of staying? What's the point of being the face of truth if you have to lie to keep the job?" Michael's jaw clenched. "Because someone has to stay. Someone has to keep trying from the inside." Denzel's eyes softened just slightly. "Then make the inside better, because right now it's breaking people's trust." Joy looked between them, almost whispering, "You two sound like two soldiers on the same battlefield." Denzel glanced at her. "That's exactly what it feels like. Only difference is one side's fighting for truth and the other's fighting for survival." That line hit hard, too hard. Michael sat back, eyes narrowing. "So what am I to you then? Just another mouthpiece? Another puppet?" Denzel sighed. "No, Michael, you're better than that. That's why it hurts to see you defend a system that's failing you and all of us. For a moment, neither man spoke. You could sense the weight of years of frustration, Denzel's disappointment with the direction of culture, Michael's exhaustion from being part of an industry constantly under fire. Then Michael stood up slightly, palms on the table. You know what, Denzel? You can criticize all you want, but at least some of us are trying to keep the public informed. You talk about truth like it's simple, but you've never had to choose between losing your job and losing your voice. Denzel looked up, unflinching. I've had to choose between my career and my conscience more times than you think. And every time, I chose the one that lets me sleep at night. That silence afterwards was absolute. Even Joy didn't speak. Michael sat back down slowly, visibly emotional now. You could see the internal tug, anger, respect, maybe even shame. The audience didn't clap. Nobody dared to. Finally, Denzel broke the silence, his tone quieter. I'm not here to tear anyone down, Michael. I'm here because this matters. The truth matters. And I still believe we can fix it if people like you lead with courage, not caution. Michael exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. His voice cracked just slightly. Maybe you're right. Maybe we've gotten too comfortable. Denzel offered a faint smile. Comfort kills change. Joy finally leaned forward. Gentlemen, she said softly, that right there, that's the conversation America needs. The audience erupted in applause this time, louder, not out of excitement, but relief. As the segment wound down, Denzel glanced at Michael, extended a hand across the table. Michael hesitated, then took it. The tension didn't vanish, but the respect was there. Two men, two truths, one hard question hanging in the air. If everyone knows the system is broken, who's brave enough to fix it? Joy's closing line landed with perfect timing. Up next, something a little lighter, but maybe, just maybe, we'll all be thinking about this one for a while. The music swelled, the cameras panned out, and the audience knew they had just witnessed something rare. Truth, breaking through the noise, even for a few seconds on morning TV.
As the outro music faded and the live broadcast cut the commercials, the tension that had hung over the set didn't disappear, it just softened into silence. Crew members whispered as they adjusted cameras, and the hosts sat quietly, collecting themselves after what had just happened. Michael Strahan leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. Denzel Washington sat across from him, still calm, but you could tell that the exchange had taken something out of both of them. The discussion had started as a debate about media bias, but by the end, it had turned into something much more human, a conversation about truth, courage, and the cost of staying silent. When they came back from commercial for the closing moments, Joy Behar was the first to speak. Her tone had changed. The usual edge in her voice was gone. We've had a lot of debates on this show, she began carefully, but what just happened, what you two said, is what people out there are feeling every single day. There's confusion, frustration, and a lot of doubt about who they can trust. Denzel gave a small nod, his hands clasped on the table. That's the heart of it, Joy. People are tired. They're told what to think instead of being shown how to think. And that's dangerous for democracy, for community, for everything. Michael looked down for a moment, then lifted his head, meeting Denzel's gaze. I get it. You're not wrong. We've let headlines replace humanity. We've turned every issue into a fight instead of a search for truth. There was no argument left in his tone, just honesty. Sonny Hostin, who had been mostly quiet during the last segment, leaned in. You know, my mom used to tell me, when you lose trust, you lose connection. I think that's where we are right now. People don't just distrust the news, they distrust each other. The studio went quiet again. Whoopi Goldberg, always the steady voice in the storm, added, We've got to start listening again, not shouting, listening. Because somewhere between the noise and the hashtags, we forgot how to hear one another. Denzel smiled faintly. That's the word right there. Listen. When people stop listening, truth turns into whatever sells the best. Michael nodded, rubbing his hands together. So where do we go from here? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Denzel's answer was simple. We start small, at our tables, in our homes, in our conversations. The truth doesn't have to trend. It just has to be told. Joy looked out towards the audience, her voice softer than usual. You know, sometimes we forget this show reaches millions of people. And maybe, just maybe, today reminded us why that matters. Because if we can have these hard talks here, maybe people at home will too. The audience, which had been respectfully silent through most of the exchange, began to applaud again, slowly at first, then louder. It wasn't the kind of applause that came from entertainment. It was the kind that comes from connection. Michael turned towards Denzel and extended his hand again, firmer this time. Thanks for calling it out, man. Even when it stings, sometimes you need to hear it. Denzel shook his hand, a small smile forming. And thank you for standing your ground. That's what makes it real. Joy glanced at the camera. Well, folks, that's what this show's supposed to be about. Different voices, honest talk, and maybe a little bit of discomfort, because that's how growth starts. The music began to rise again, signaling the end of the hour. As the camera pulled back for the final wide shot, the five of them sat there, not as celebrities or pundits, but as people who had just wrestled with something bigger than themselves. Michael's last words, caught just before the credits rolled, lingered in the air. Maybe the problem isn't that we're too biased. Maybe it's that we've forgotten how to be brave. The screen faded to black, and viewers across America were left with the same uneasy but powerful feeling that for the first time in a long time, Good Morning America had lived up to its name. Not just a morning show, but a mirror held up to a divided nation. If you liked this powerful moment, make sure to subscribe for more celebrity debates, emotional showdowns, and unforgettable TV moments. Drop a comment below. Do you think the media has become too biased, or are we just too divided to see clearly anymore?